So as I promised you, I'm coming to you after our last Leadership Council meeting, a little bit later than what I had initially said to you. There are a lot of circumstances surrounding that, but all the same, here I am. So to summarize what we talked about at our last luncheon, we talked about the soundtrack that goes on in your brain and some strategies to work through that. And the first thing, there's 4 actions basically that I want to summarize that. And the first one is to notice that there's stuff being said in your head, that you're talking to yourself all the time. So to notice that. Number 2, to identify, is it helpful what you're saying to yourself? Number 3, if it's not helpful, let's replace it. And number 4, let's just keep repeating that new soundtrack. So let's recognize the soundtrack, break that soundtrack if it's a bad one. Replace it. Let's create an automatic go-to that might help strengthen your self-talk, and then just repeat it over and over. And we talked about how we might practice that. So, I said I might put a rubber band on my, if I'm beginning this process of recognizing my self-talk, I might put a rubber band and snap myself every time I hear a negative self-talk. And that might help trigger that automatic new track. So I'm going to ask you some questions here in the Google form. The questions are going to be very much what we just talked about at our last Leadership Council luncheon. And it is, what is the soundtrack that begins to play, like when you a circumstance happens that's negative to you, or you're called out of your comfort zone, or something happens on the athletic field and that has a negative context to it. What is that negative play that usually happens? What is that soundtrack that usually starts happening? Then next question, is it helpful, kind, or true? Because remember what I said was, sometimes a lot of times what's going on in our head, or what we're saying to ourselves, is just an outright lie. It's just an outright lie. So what is that soundtrack? Is it true, helpful, or kind? And then I'm going to ask you to create a replacement and put that in the Google form. And then what are some creative ways that you can remember this? Maybe you put a little sign, your new soundtrack, you put it on in your locker, you put it somewhere where you can see it all the time. I already mentioned that that wouldn't work for me. I would snap my wrist, maybe a rubber band on my wrist, and then just repeat that. So remember, at our last luncheon, I said the highest group, the group that returns this Google form at the highest percentage, I'm giving you just your lunch, unless you go 100%, everybody represents 100%. You're all getting it. But if it's not 100% by all of you, the group that has the highest percentage return on this Google form will get your own individual Chick-fil-A lunch. And I'll just invite you back to my office. You grab your lunch and you go. So welcome back from Christmas break. I hope you had a great Christmas, and I hope you're off to a great New Year's. And I look forward to seeing you soon.